So I'm Kate Anderson. I'm a researcher in the School of Health and Social Development, and I'm a member of the Disability and Inclusion team. And I'm based on Burwood campus, which is on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I trained as a speech pathologist, so my background is in allied health. And before I came to Deakin, I worked in paediatric speech pathology with children with cerebral palsy and autism predominantly. And I have a real passion around assistive technology and the way that technologies can help people with disabilities to participate in the world around them and in activities with other people. So really interested in mainstream inclusion and making sure that people have an equitable experience, which is something that's quite common to the rest of our research team as well. I think I got into assistive technology because I'm a bit of a nerd. I really enjoy sort of tinkering with technology. I really enjoy some kind of coding work, and even though I did a very human-focused degree and love working with people, I also am really interested in the way that people interact with technologies. So when I came to Deakin, I got quite involved in the community of design thinkers and design researchers here at Deakin, which is quite robust, and have been involved in a lot of interdisciplinary projects around the way that people interact with technology and the way that technologies can be used to generate inclusion and equitability and really extend people's abilities out beyond where they thought they were, whether you have a disability or a diversity or just in the general population. I found that design thinking was a really good way of structuring my own research, and it's really changed the way that I research as well. Instead of being a researcher that decides on the way that the project is going to work and the methods that we're going to use, I now use a lot of co-design processes. So I bring people within the population into the research process, really sort of support them to become research partners and to design the methods of the study tools, and really look at the way that research fits the needs of the people that it's serving, which is, in my case, the end users of the assistive technology. So that's what I'm really passionate about, and I think it's a little bit different to traditional notions of research where we think of ourselves as studying a population. In this case, I'm really partnering with members of a group to design solutions that are going to meet their needs best. A lot of my students come to me with things that they've encountered in their work or in their day-to-day lives. Some of my students have had disability experiences, either themselves or as a family member, and a lot of my students have worked in industry settings. And so they'll come to me with something that is really getting up their nose in their practice or in their life, some kind of problem that they would like to learn more about or that they would actually like to solve. And so I've had students who have done work in inclusive education and have come to me and said, I'm a little bit worried about the way that pre-service teachers, for instance, are learning about inclusive education. And so one of my students, Georgia, has just completed her project partnering with Beyond Blue to develop some training resources for pre-service educators to get them thinking about inclusive education and to have them prepared for the challenges of that practice. That was something that she had encountered working as a teacher's aide. I've also had students who have come to me working in areas like, say, supported employment for people with disabilities, who have said, I'm a bit worried about our workers and in the way that they are transitioning into retirement, so how they're prepared to cope once their job ends, their working life ends. And so one of my students, Lenny, has just finished his project based in his own organisation and some of the partner organisations in the sector, really revamping plans for supported transition to retirement in supported employment settings. And I think this is kind of key to a lot of my students' work, is that they come with a practical problem and they work with me, but also members of whatever community they're part of, their work community, or other people with the same disability, to really produce some kind of solution. The supervision process itself is really exciting. You start exploring what it means to be a researcher, and I think the best bits for me are watching my students develop relationships with other students, other researchers in the team, build their confidence and their identity as researchers. I often see my students move through a bit of an aha moment. There's a lot of uncertainty at the start, and research students are often not quite sure whether this is a good fit for them, whether this is something that they want to do, and have a bit of difficulty sometimes seeing themselves as the primary researcher in a project. And then there's an aha moment, and I love watching my students take ownership of their project, and the point where they realise, this is my research and I'm doing this. And I think when I see my students talking about their research with pride and with passion, and presenting their research at conferences, or the day that their first paper is published out of that research, they're really important moments, and I've seen every one of my students go through that transition. It's always exciting. Students in my research projects are grappling with practical problems. So one of the things that I always take my students through is this notion of design thinking and human-centred design. The first thing that my students tend to learn and carry into their future practice is the ability to clearly identify a problem in practice. And it sounds easy, but actually defining your own research question and defining your own practice problem to investigate or to solve is pretty challenging, and it's also a really valuable tool to have. So we have quite strategic ways of getting students to identify and clearly define the problem that they're trying to resolve as part of their research. I think the second thing that my students will often develop and grow in is their patience and their ability to listen. So a lot of the work in design research and human-centred design is about listening to the needs of the people that you're working with, and to push through setbacks, and to go back to the drawing board when things aren't working. And sometimes as a research student that process can be frustrating, but getting to the end and realising that you have a much better outcome, a much more useful resource, a much more robust understanding of a problem is a really great thing. And again, something that my students will then, I see, carry into their future practice in the field. These research projects in the area of human-centred design, they attract people who are really creative. It's not a very clearly articulated research process. It's not set in stone, so creative people who are really interested in technology, or who are really interested in people. It doesn't even have to be about technology. It can be a very human problem, but you have to have that interest in people, and you have to be quite creative, and your patience will develop as you go through the process. Being a researcher who is working often with quite marginalised groups of people, the way that you work as a researcher and the way that you collaborate with the people that you're working with as co-researchers, it can be a very mutually empowering experience. Students grow in that they're developing their research identity, but we also know it's a really important and valuable experience for people to be a co-researcher and to be really involved in driving changes in the types of services or products or technologies that they're using, and even just to be able to share their story and have somebody listen and take that on board. So I think, often I see students who come to me with something that has frustrated them for a long time, and it's almost kind of a cathartic experience to be able to do research in that area and to see practical change fall out of it. And so, I think it's definitely something that students should consider if they have had any kinds of experiences of marginalisation or inequity, or they've been in a position of advocacy supporting people who have.